long sermon. uh, when we lived in Auburn, we got visited very quickly by the Baptist church. They came in a hurry and sat down in our living room and proceeded to kind of eyeball us to figure out if we were the proper kind of Baptists that we needed to be in order to be in the church in Auburn. They were really nice people. But one of the things that happened was the pastor was fairly new as well. He was from Arkansas. And we were talking one day and he just said, I just feel like I am just supposed to be in the pulpit. It was something about he needed to be somewhere else and he was working around it. His name was Perry. And I said, Perry, how many people remember what you said last week? I said, how about 2 weeks ago? And then if we really want to get difficult, let's go 3 weeks ago. I said, nobody remembers what you did, what you say. I said, we got the words of Jesus. I don't think we're going to add to them. I said, but most people do remember what we do. And so one of the things that we did, it was the first time we ever did it. That's where the free garage giveaway was birthed, was in Auburn, Alabama. And it was a notion of let's just get into the community and be the community and help the community. And it's life changing when you do the gospel instead of talking about the gospel. It's different. And for so many people, we want to argue about how many theological fairies can dance on the head of a pin and have all of these, hobnobbing conversations about who's right and who's wrong. And Lord knows some of this stuff is really important, fundamental to the faith. But what you need to be doing is working out, and Paul even says that, work those details out when he's in Romans. He says, and don't go crazy if you disagree on some of them, which meant that Paul was perfectly okay with some people saying, I think this is right, I think that's right. And Paul would just go, I think you're both right. What are y'all doing to advance the gospel? And I think that's where churches really get themselves, they get their panties all wadded up, is they start trying to figure out what it is about us that's different. How come I can't, you don't think this or that. And so we begin to focus on the differences rather than the gospel. And if you want to see a bunch of different goofballs, put the 12 people together that Jesus chose. And that was hardly what you would call the A-team. They were, by all accounts, humans, just like us. And in fact, if you bother to read the scriptures, particularly Luke, you'll find out that what they really like to do with each other was argue a lot of times. I think I'm the greatest. No, I think I'm the greatest. Me, no, me. So let's go get mom. Let's go get mom to ask Jesus which one of us is really the greatest. I mean, you just see humanity in this stuff, right? But somehow these goofballs, like us, the same kind of goofballs, somehow they changed the world. And they changed the world when they got into the world, when they actually started dealing with the people. And I think that's another problem with the church is we expect the people to come to us, but Satan's like dominoes. He delivers in 30 minutes or less. Whatever you want, I'll get it to you, buddy. You don't have to leave your chair. I can torch your mind with the most sinister stuff. And meanwhile, we sit here and say, Lord, just bring these people to us. Well, now, that's a great prayer, but part of the problem with that prayer is it's like that old Otis Redding song, Shout Bama Lama. It is, without a doubt, right up there with Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, and then we've got Otis. Preacher and a deacon out walking one day. Out come a bear along the way. The preacher told the deacon to say a prayer. Said, ain't no prayer going to kill that bear. We got to run for it. And the theology there is quite simple. We want to sit around sometimes and pray the bear out of the way when Jesus is saying, climb up the tree. Do something. Move. Prayer is not passive. What we often call prayer is prayer, but it's not the only kind of prayer. You want to know what a prayer is? Handing out a plate of jambalaya to somebody who shows up here. That's a prayer. Making sure that somebody can get school supplies. That's a prayer. And it's a prayer that's being offered every time, because what it is it's every time you do that, you're saying, use me, Lord. Put me in the game. Let me play. Well, if you've ever gone to a real game, baseball, if you ever saw Dylan Cruz, did Dylan Cruz ever leave a game with a clean uniform? No. I mean, it's filthy. He's all been everywhere. He's sliding into base and all this other kind of stuff. And the point being is that if you're not beat up a little bit at the end of it, you probably hadn't been playing. Because somebody's going to show up and go, they're going to get mad, or they're going to start attacking, or they're going to whatever, criticize. And that's what we saw happen to Jesus. The more profound it became for him, the more people criticized. So let's tie that into very quickly what we have been going through, which is the nature of God in the Old Testament. Because he just seems like he's ticked off. I mean, that's the way it kind of looks, right? You know, especially if you just read it and you don't have the background for it. So last week we looked at two groups of people, the Canaanites and the Amalekites, and both of these were folks that when Joshua and his people go into the promised land, they had conflicts with these people, and they were big conflicts. And when you read about them, it says that they were completely wiped out. They were destroyed. They were annihilated. It was women, children, and you get this picture of, because here yesterday we had this 3-week-old baby sitting here, a papoose, I'm talking, right? I mean, we're talking. And if you read the scripture, it says that the men went in and mercilessly killed 3-week-old babies. And you're going, how do I reconcile this with a God of love? This is, and so what you've often heard, and I think there's truth to this, but I don't think it goes far enough, is that these people were so despicable, and I'm like, yeah, but the Israelites managed to take on some of those same characters. The Israelites managed to figure out, they tried child sacrifice on for size. The Israelites did pagan worship. You're going to be hard pressed to start finding activity. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, wait a minute. I think what we really need to do is start asking ourselves, what's the true nature of God? And so what we saw last week is a lot of times where it says in Scripture that they were completely wiped out and destroyed, you find them there two chapters later. They're still there. And then what they have through archaeology, they have uncovered artifacts from this time from other countries, Egypt, for example. And we talked about that a little bit in detail last week. I don't want to do it today because everybody's tired. But what it basically said is that it would use the same kind of biblical language. We destroyed the entire Israeli, all their families, all their kids. Well, they didn't do that. We know that that's an exaggeration. And so that was it coming from the other side, and now we see this from this side. So in 1 Samuel 15, this was from last week, it says, I'm going to punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them. I bet you that's the only place in Scripture where it says waylaid, right? It's 1 Samuel 15. It says, I will punish the Israelites for what they did when they ambushed them as they came up from Egypt. Go attack the Amalekites, and this is Samuel talking to Saul. Totally destroy all that belongs to them. Don't spare the men, don't spare the women, don't spare the children, don't spare the infants, don't spare the cattle, the sheep, the camels, the donkeys. In other words, if it's attached to them, get rid of it. That's what it says. And then in verse 7 of 1 Samuel 15, it says this, Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, But he destroyed everybody else with the sword. All the people he destroyed, right? All the people. So that seems clear enough. Now we know that Saul was supposed to kill the king and he didn't, and that's how Saul winds up not being ruler, but that's a story for a different day. So that's 1 Samuel 15, but if you turn to 1 Samuel 27, which is just 12 chapters over, it says David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. Well, wait a minute. How do you raid a people who had been totally destroyed? And it says from ancient time, those people lived in the land extending to Shur in Egypt. Whenever David attacked an area, he did not leave a man or woman alive, but he took sheep and cattle, donkeys and camels and clothes, and then he returned. And it says that David just, so my point here is, David just utterly destroyed what Saul had utterly destroyed. Well, if you've utterly destroyed it, you can't utterly destroy it again. And we have language from other cultures at this time. It's battle language, if you will. The example we used last week was if LSU happens to beat Alabama 58-0, what are people going to say the next day? We killed them. Well, I didn't see anybody get buried, right? We annihilated them. We destroyed them. So that language is not something that's foreign, still there for us. And we shouldn't be surprised that would be something that would be understood. But my point being is that if you're going to argue that they're all utterly destroyed, well, then they've been utterly destroyed twice. And then when you go down to verse 30 from 1 Samuel 27, you jump from 8 to 30. It says, David and his men reached Ziklag on the third day, and the Amalekites had raided Ziklag. They attacked Ziklag and burned it. Well, not only have they not utterly been destroyed, but they're still out there causing problems. So here these people still are, right? Now, just stay with me for a second. Don't bother to turn there, but if you want to, you can. It's 1 Chronicles 4. It's a very quick verse. 1 Chronicles 4 goes through the clans of Israel, and which is just exciting reading. I mean, you get through with that, and you're like, whew, got to take a break. But it gets to verse 43, and it's talking about the clans of Israel. It says, verse 43 of 1 Chronicles 4 says, they killed the remaining Amalekites who had escaped, and they have lived there to this day. Now, here's the question. We have 1 Samuel, then we got 1 Chronicles. How much time passes from 1 Samuel to 1 Chronicles? Experts say about 250 years. 250 years after the Amalekites are utterly destroyed, who do we find? The Amalekites. So I think we're starting to see something about the nature of God here. Now we have to be careful. I will just say, I would have a hard time trying to explain to a skeptic why that little 3-week-old baby yesterday would have been fit for the sword. I don't care who his parents are. That would be a hard sell. And I think we have to be very careful when we start talking about the nature of God, the physical being of God, the God who is love, and get too far over our skis. Does God judge? Oh yeah, yes indeed. But it's always with a judgment. When God sends you for the T, it's not to punish you. It's to get you in a position to be who you can be, where you can be, with who you need to be. The punishment comes when it's like you refuse the options that are being given to you. So there's other examples that'd be available for that too, where they've just been utterly destroyed. So now let's go to Jericho. We've all heard the story. The walls of Jericho came tumbling down. Do you know what the walls of Jericho actually look like? Pretty dang impressive. The first wall would have been about 6 feet high and probably about so wide. Could you crawl over that? Yeah. But the second wall behind it is even taller. And then there is this large expanse of a hill. Think of a levee, if you will. And on the top of that is another wall that's about 46 feet high. And so you know if you've gone that high, what kind of width are you going to have in order to be able to support this wall, right? So there's this three-tiered structure. When you say the wall of Jericho, it's actually a fortified embankment process. If you happen to get past the first wall, you run into a taller wall. If you happen to get past that wall, you got to scale the levee. And when you do that, the only thing you're left with is you're standing there looking at a 46-foot tall. You're not going to siege this thing. You're not going to just come up to it, lay your ladders on top of it. That's not going to happen, right? So the language in Joshua makes it clear. This is Joshua 6. It says that the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. So Jericho saw them coming and said what? Lock it down. No one went out, no one comes in. The Lord said to Joshua, I've delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and its fighting men. Interesting. March around the city, and you all know what it was. When they marched around the city and they did that what? 6 times. 7th time, what did they do? How many times? 7 times. So we marched 6 times for 6 days, once each day. And then the 7th day we do what? We're going on a long walk today, boys. 7 times around. So I got a question for you. If you can march around a city 7 times in a day and still attack the city and fight, how long have you been walking? Because if you've been walking for 5 or 6 hours and now it's like, I tell you what I need you to do. Stop what you're doing and go attack and totally destroy the city. What does this tell you about the size of Jericho? Not terribly large. What's the picture that we generally have of ourselves of a picture of Jericho when we hear that? We think of what? A really large, but you think about this. I'm going to walk around it 7 times? All right, so let's do it, military men. If you're not in the military, your average walking speed is approximately 3 miles per hour. A forced march is approximately 4 miles per hour. A 15-minute mile is going to be what they would call a forced march. So in 15 minutes, you would go a mile. If you walk for 30 minutes, you would cross 2 miles all around, right? If you did that 7 times, that would be 3.5 hours at a 15-minute pace. Carrying gear. No potty breaks, no restroom breaks, no food. You get the picture. You've been in full pack. So what we need to start thinking about is, what does this look like? Because what I'm trying to do is get a picture of what we're talking about. Now this is Jericho is the first city that Joshua and his people run into that they're supposed to capture. It says the king's there and the military people are there and the priests are there. So, and it's highly fortified, highly fortified. So what you're beginning to see here is more of a military religious complex than a habitation. And in fact, they've done archaeology all around this area. And in the city of Jericho itself, they have no archaeological evidence of it being a residential place. All the artifacts that they've come up with have been military or related to military, which seems to say that the place was a fort. Now, if you were close to the fort, if you were at Fort Benning, you don't necessarily live on Fort Benning. A lot of the people live where? Around in the surrounding communities, in the hills and stuff around Jericho. It's quite possible that that's what happened. Now, the other side of this is, if you're in this place and you see these Israelites walking around without saying a word 6 times, what does this give you an opportunity to do? Bug out. Anybody think about quitting? Because what did we see what happened in Nineveh when they relented? You can't ever forget this. What happened when Jonah went to the Ninevites? What happened? They did what? It said, we stop. We're wrong. We have screwed up. And it says God relented. So using that as a picture of God, if these people would have been looking over this thing and watching this and kind of going, huddle up, guys. Them crazy people are going to kill us. Why don't we turn and repent? And I got to figure that the picture that was already there would be the same picture. Otherwise, we're saying that God would somehow be inconsistent. I think part of that reason that this is happening is for these people to understand, and if they're not going to change, at least what's going to happen is the word's going to get out. They were given an opportunity. How many days? 6 days. They were given an opportunity. I think there's a picture there of God saying, come back. So how big is the city? Well, some estimates have been 1,200 to 1,500 people. Don't really know whether there were people living inside there. We're back to that total destruction language where total wasn't necessarily total, but this uses the same kind of language. And then we've got the prostitute, Rahab. The prostitute. She ran a hostel. What's a hostel? It's an inn. It's not a bordello. It's an inn. And so likely these people that were traveling to this place that had military significance, one of the things what you always put on your border is a what? A fort. Why? Because you got to know if the bad guys are trying to come, if they're trying to come get your land. So there would have been a place here where the king could have been there, the military people could have been there, religious people could have been there. These people are traveling. These could have been similar kinds of activities, and they all meet at this inn. And what do the Israelites do? Send me some spies. Check it out. Just go hang out. See what you find out. So they were able to gather the intel on the city. Now that's interesting because the only thing we hear is God said shout. And then we think what? The walls came down. But that's not the way it went. That was part of it. God said send the spies in. Now why would God need to send the spies in if all he was planning on doing was what? I need you guys to shout and blow the place up. Obviously, what's going on here is he's trying to get these people to cooperate with his will to create the best outcome. That's obviously what's happening here. It's not just about, we go to the end of the story where we talk about shouting and going nuts. Yeah, but we scouted this place out ahead of time. We found out who we could trust and who we couldn't trust. We know that this lady is someone that we can count on. So we know that the 7th time around, and they're all sitting up there probably going, well, this one's weird because they're doing stuff different today that they hadn't done before. And on about number 5, they're probably going, wow. And then they get to 7, and when they get to 7, what happens? I need you to shout, because when you shout, the walls. Now, the archaeological findings around Jericho do show that the walls collapsed. Inconvenient fact for those who think that the Old Testament is just a bunch of made-up malarkey. They go in, they burn the city, they do all that stuff, they spare Rahab. We've been through the language about the total destruction, so we're not going to spend much time there. What's important about Rahab? Well, we can figure out, first of all, that the people that were killed were the combatants that were watching this stuff. There's a real strong argument for that. I was just thinking, sitting there watching that little kid yesterday, thinking about this message today, and I'm going, there's no way God kills that kid. That's just not what God does. And I think it's difficult. It's difficult language. Now, I could go say this, and I can reconcile this. God in his foreknowledge could look out and say, that kid will grow up to be nothing but a doomed person. If I take them to heaven now, they can come with me. But if I leave them to their own design, they're going to be an Amalekite just like every other Amalekite, and they're not going to. I could see that. But it doesn't seem to be that doesn't seem to be God's standard operating order of business. His operating order of business is really more about, why don't you relent? Why don't you stop? Why don't you come to me? If you'll change, if. So, but anyway, we do know that. The total destruction language that we find in Jericho is very similar to what we've already seen, where people were not utterly destroyed. But now we've got Rahab. She lived among the Israelites. Why is Rahab important? Matthew 1, verse 15. The genealogy of Jesus. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Now we make a mistake here when we go, Jesus has a prostitute in his line. Of course he does. He has a murderer in his line. He has thieves in his line. He has us in his line. So therefore, he came to save the world. If he came to save the world, then he was going to have the world in his line. But I think we missed the point there. It wasn't that Rahab used to be a prostitute. Because if we do that, that's what we do with our lives. We define ourselves by who we were. All the time. Matthew could tell us about who he was, who he was, who he was. But the bottom line is, Matthew ain't that guy anymore. So who he was isn't nearly as important as who he is. And we screw this up all the time as believers because we talk about who we were. And some people need to hear that. But some of us live there. We never get out of who we were. We're still guilt-ridden by something. We're still hanging on to we wonder how God could ever forgive. You know the story, right? It's the self-doubt, the self-incrimination. But yet Romans says what? There is therefore now no condemnation. If you read that carefully, it kind of doesn't say, because if you go down the bottom, it's not like an insurance policy where in 132nd font, where you have to read it with a micron telescope, an electron telescope. There's not something down there that says there is now no condemnation, with the exception of those people who did the following things. It says no. So here we have Rahab. At one time was a prostitute. Why? Because it was probably the only way she could make money. Because that's the way it was when you were a woman back there. If you weren't married, and you had no property that was going to somehow be yours, you had no options. She's spared, but it's obvious that she doesn't stay a prostitute. It's also obvious that she wasn't judged for being a prostitute. I'd love for you to be my wife, Salmon says. That almost sounds like a game. Where my head goes sometimes just absolutely frightens me. It scares me to death.
Frightens us.
It should. It should. It's not that she was, because if that would have been the case, then what would have happened to the marriage? It never would have happened. I can't marry you. You're a hooker. But that's not the way it went. So we do this to ourselves all the time, and I think that's one of the takeaways from this story. Rahab was redeemed. There was no condemnation. And if you can't turn that, let me put it in the most positive spin I can. What led you to Christ? Prostitution? Gambling? Lust? I don't know, drugs, alcohol. What led you to Christ? The bottom line is, you can look at it one or two ways. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. Now you can keep talking about how you were blind, or you can celebrate the fact that you now can see. Could you imagine a blind person getting their sight restored? You see these little babies where they put these glasses on them on YouTube. Oh man, you can't watch that. It's just like, well, because the kid can't see, and then all of a sudden it's like, and they see their mother. It's like, oh, wow. But can you imagine this kid when he's he could just automatically start talking? You think the kid's going to keep talking about what he couldn't do, or is the kid going to start talking about what he can do? I think that's the message for today. What can we do? Not who we were. Who we are today is the Living Waters Church. That's us. That's who we are. What can we do? Using what God has given us and who we are now, what can we do? And the answer is, and I said that semi-facetiously, 12 men changed the world. along with a bunch of women and stuff that were helping them. Let's not make this sexist. We're just trying to change Walker. I saw enough come through here yesterday that Walker needs to be changed. I can tell you that. We saw enough at North Park, but there's areas around here that need to be changed. If you've never done it, you need to do it sometime. You need to drive down here about 3/4 of a mile and take a right. And just keep going. And I won't have to explain anything else to you. If you've never done it, do it. And you'll go, my God, how can this be? And it's like Terry says, you want to ask what some of these kids need when they come to her school every day? Mostly they just need love, because if they had love, they'd get the rest of the stuff. But some of these parents do love, and they just can't give. And when that happens, that's where the church is supposed to step in. So, I'm kind of like Matt. It's time to get jacked up. It's time to say this is real. This is good stuff. We can make a difference. We will make a difference. Some of you people are going to take them plates out of here today and make a difference. Because it's what you need to do. God's leading you to do that. But it was good stuff yesterday. And for those of you that couldn't be here, that's not a problem. We know you were here in spirit. We know that you were here. None of this should be a guilt trip on anybody, for heaven's sakes. But that was just the first of many. There's more to come. And so, when we do what we're supposed to do, I'll leave it, but this is how we'll end. When you honor God with what you do, God will honor what you do. It's pretty simple. Father, we thank you for the opportunity to experience in a way that sort of gives us your perspective. We thank you for the opportunity to experience the world as you see it. And may we be as burdened as you are to change that world. Use us, and we will try to honor you while we do it. It's in your Son's name.